Hi, everyone. We're just going to give it a couple of minutes while we wait for people to join. Again, we're just waiting to give everyone some time to join in, then we'll get started in just a moment here. All right. Well, welcome everybody. I'm Tom Walker. I'm the Executive Director at Encore Outpatient Services. We are a partnership between Caron Treatment Centers and Maryland Addiction Recovery Center. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar series, DMV Neighbors in Treatment and Recovery, a spotlight on local resources, programs, and expertise. Every week, we look forward to highlighting a different provider in the DMV region to provide you with some insights and resources you can utilize in your practice. Please note that these sessions are not eligible for continuing education credit. We will be conducting these sessions in a webinar format. All participant microphones will be muted. During the presentation, please utilize the Q&A feature to ask any questions you may have. We will have time for questions at the end of the presentation. This week's presenter, Dr. Robin Norris, is with us today to speak on the topic Emotions of Money in the Time of COVID-19. Dr. Norris has been a licensed marriage and family therapist for the past 2 decades. She has been a scholar throughout the US and in the United Kingdom. Combining her education with her experience as a practitioner and an offshore yacht racer, she has a unique perspective on planning and crisis management with individuals, couples, and businesses. She will talk to you today about her experience in supporting others since the COVID-19 pandemic has started. Please welcome Dr. Norris.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys allowing me to come in today. Thank you to Encore and Caron and the Maryland Addiction Recovery, especially Tom and Caitlin for helping out. So let's think about this, the emotions of money. Some people, when they hear the word money, they get excited. Some people get frustrated, and we're going to talk about it today in terms of what it is to be in the land of COVID-19. So I'm Dr. Robin Norris. I am with Windward Optimal Health, and welcome to you guys for your Lunch and Learn today. Next slide, please. So the experiences of my career have led me to here. I'm sitting in a room with a pretend wall behind me, and I guess that's where it begins, because what a journey it has been. Next slide. Years and years and years ago, I decided that I really wanted to be a therapist, and I wanted to work with kids, and I wanted to work with kids that had challenges, and the challenges were in the medical field. So I worked with children that had pre-existing medical conditions, most often cancer. And in my internship year, that was the year as a Massachusetts middle school counselor intern, that's when Columbine happened. And I will never forget my supervisor sitting us all down week 2 and saying, so I'm going to leave right now and I'm going to go help out on a crisis that we have not seen before, at least in his world as a supervisor. So being in a middle school when Columbine happened was a real entry into being a clinician and starting to understand the field of trauma. Next slide, please. So I moved from Massachusetts because it was really, really cold. I went to Boston College and absolutely loved it there. But boy, oh boy, I needed some sunshine. I needed to definitely get out of the big snows in Boston. And what do you do when you're younger? You go west. You grab a guitar, you grab a backpack, and you go west. So I became a resident director at San Jose State University in 2001, was when September 11th happened. I had been a resident director for a full year, so it was not new to me to have, you know, a bunch of freshmen trying to figure out what the boundaries were and when they were going to do things and when they weren't. But it was completely new to me to be working in a space that was affected in so many, many ways. Again, here we speak to a trauma that the nation felt, a trauma that these students felt, these international students felt. I grew up in the Jersey Shore, and so losing an icon of New York City for me was huge, and I felt a million miles away. And I love to travel, but boy, oh boy, did I feel a million miles away. So here we have, you know, 2001, September 11th happens. Next slide, please. Had a good bunch of years in California, you know, got the license, became the marriage and family therapist, met the perfect person who decides, oops, we're gonna go move our lives over to England for career change for him. Not a problem. I'm excited. I'm now gonna leave my sunny space to go over to some space that has a little bit more rain. And we end up in the UK, and I'm there a whole, I think almost a week when they got the Olympic bid. And that first picture was one I took when I was in Trafalgar Square. Couldn't think of a better day. I was standing behind a bunch of kids, and they had confetti and crepe paper, and just, it was a magical time. Absolutely amazingly magical time to be in a big city that wins an Olympic bid. Within a day or so, London had its bombings. Okay, well, I've got some crisis training. I've got some therapy that understands trauma. Okay, how's this gonna feel? Well, it felt different. I felt even more away from home. I felt even more scared. I went to the memorials. So within 2 weeks, that next picture is from photos I took at pretty much almost the same spot I was standing. And that was the memorial for the London bombings. So I seemingly couldn't get away from the concept of trauma as I went around. But, you know, we learn, we grieve, we mourn, we keep going. And that's what trauma teaches us. Next slide, please. Oops, went the other way. So we moved back from England to take care of a few of our family members. And for a little bit, I worked as a substitute school teacher in my old school in Seaside Heights, New Jersey. Licensing is not the easiest thing to transfer state to state. And so it wasn't so easy for me to zip back into being a family therapist. So I zipped right into what else I knew, which was working with children. I had the outstanding opportunity to be in a very special classroom where not only was I in my hometown school, but I was, you know, working with a really cool team of people that some I had grown up with and some had been there when I was there. So a few years later, I'm living in Virginia, you know, having my second child, and Hurricane Sandy hits. The teacher whose classroom I had watched for a few months was Marsha Denisio. She ended up People Magazine's Teacher of the Year, because here you have a situation where you don't just have a little flood, you don't just have a little fire. Your entire town is underwater. The school completely flooded. Her home completely flooded to a point where she became homeless. A lot of the kids became homeless. You know, I felt pretty hopeless and helpless in Virginia. So what did I do? I packed up my car with every kind of non-perishable food item I could fit all the way up and through the glove compartment. And I drove up to my hometown and was let in to see what was pretty much the wreckage. I will never forget seeing a home about 4 blocks from where I grew up. And we walked along the back side of it, and it looked like a dollhouse. And when you think of a dollhouse, you think of, 3 walls, a roof, a floor, and an entire wall missing. And you're looking in, and there's a bathroom, and there's a living room, and there's a floor below, and so many things. But you don't expect that in real life, not when it's not newly being under construction. You don't expect to see your neighbor's house look like a dollhouse. So again, as a trauma therapist, here's an experience that I'm learning from. So the town went on, most people came out and survived it, thankfully. We're not taken away with the flood. We lost a lot of people's homes, and some never rebuilt. Some moved out. The kids themselves, some went back, some didn't. So Seaside Park, New Jersey, no longer has an elementary school because not enough children went back. They didn't have the enrollment numbers. This book in particular, Class Dismissed, Lessons of Survival, was written and co-authored by Marcia Denisio. Because again, it's not something we saw. We didn't see a supernova hurricane coming towards the shoreline. We'd had hurricanes before. We'd had high tides and moon floods and everything that you can imagine growing up in a coastal area, but never before could I have imagined that scene, which is on the front cover of this, and it's the roller coaster that I grew up seeing. And it used to be on a pier, but the pier got wiped away. The restaurants got wiped away. The other rides got wiped away. And then unfortunately, a year later, when they attempted to rebuild things, there was a fire. So even in the rebuilding process, they went through another trauma a year later. So Class Dismissed, Lessons of Survival for me was hometown turf of how do we make it okay when it's not okay, especially for kids. Next slide, please. Which brings me to here and today. So I'm in Virginia. I've been in Boston, I've been in the UK, I've been in Jersey, I've been in California. And now I'm a marriage and family therapist. And I'm also an online professor for Old Dominion University. And ironically enough, I teach crisis management. When things like COVID-19 and another Black man is murdered. For me, I took this photo a couple weeks ago. It's actually in Manassas, Virginia. And it's very surreal. It's very, very surreal in that the bank already has a line of people at its window because it had to shut its doors to COVID with invite only. Mask up, glove up, invite only. And then it lost pretty much its only sunlight left as a representation of the things that occurred because of the injustices that have happened in this nation. So when we think about emotions and trauma and banking and money, we've got people both in that line outside at that teller window, and we've got people inside that building still working. As long as I can remember, I don't think I have had this many trauma things happen at once. So the next slide, please. The biggest thing that I think has been ingrained in a lot of us at this point is that we're all feeling it globally. We're feeling emotions that are affecting our mood. And when we feel something globally, that feels very, very, very unsettling. So the situations that I unveiled to you in the slides before were ones that happened regionally, locally, nationally, with an influence of international feeling, but nothing like this. This is global. I went to the post office to mail some letters the other day, and I have friends that live in many, many nations. And it was surreal for me to get 2 cards sent back through the US postal system, one to India and one to Colombia. And it basically said they're rejecting the US mail right now. That wasn't because the addresses were incorrect. And the US Post Office was gracious in saying, would you like your money back for your international stamps? But that was a real emotional mode for me, because it's something I do every year. I send out cards to people every summer. And to have them come back, not because the people weren't there, but because the means weren't there, is very traumatic to some people, for sure. So when we talk about global feelings and we talk about moods and emotion, we have to think that money is a part of our human nature, and currency and exchange is a part of our construction. It's fear, it's sad, it's joy, it's angry, it's enough, it's not enough, it's just right. Next slide, please. So as a financial therapist, what do? We help folks with emotions and mood around financial situations, and we deal with intervention and prevention. Right now, I'd say we're in an intervention mode. You know, there's some tactics we can use from prevention, but we're definitely right now in an intervention space. So this great Calvin and Hobbes piece says, do you have an idea for a project yet? Nope, waiting for inspiration. You can't just turn on creativity like a faucet, so you have to be in the right mood. Well, what mood is that? Last minute panic. Well, if last minute panic is a mood, boy, oh boy, I have seen that mood play out more and more and more times since March than I care to look for. Next slide, please. So what are we going to learn today quickly? Some of the story of financial therapy, the topics that people have been coming in to speak about in the last few weeks, some ways to address the topics, keeping trauma in mind, and then some tools that are used more often in non-global crisis times. So I'll show you some things I've been kind of doing now, and I'll give you some examples of what we used to do before COVID hit, and definitely will still continue to do, but I'll explain to you why it's not so easy to use right now. Next slide, please. So when I think about the concept of the word influencer, that was not something I thought of researchers as before, or theorists, but influencer is a fun word that I was totally stealing from social engagement spaces. And I want to give kudos to these individuals for being financial therapy influencers. Financial therapy unto itself is a combination of financial planners coming together with therapists, psychologists, social workers to really address the things that are going on for people's lives, which finances are a tangled string throughout. So Rick Collier back in the 90s started studying emotions and mood and how they tied in with financial. He's currently teaching courses out at Golden Gate University. Doctors Brad and Ted Klontz, a father and son team, Brad is the son, Dr. Ted Klontz is the father, are at Creighton University. And along with Rick, they created many books. And one of the one was called Financial Wisdom of Ebenezer Scrooge, the 5 Principles of Transforming Your Relationship with Money. And so it's kind of a bit of a baby field if we think about it in terms of psychology or therapy, but it's one that actually has a solid base in theory, a solid base in learning, a solid base in teaching. And so it's getting more to a spot where more and more therapists need to understand the parts of these. And I also have to thank Dr. Christy Archuleta at University of Georgia, Dr. Megan McCoy, and Dr. Sonia Britt-Luter at Kansas State University for, again, charging forward and bringing this field into being something that is unique unto itself and way overdue. The concept of money has been taboo for way too many years. You know, we're able to talk about everything on the intimate level in therapy, but when it comes to money, for some reason, that's something that a lot of folks didn't want to talk about. Next slide, please. So if you're brand new to this, you're learning about the courses of study, you're looking for the Financial Therapy Association, you're learning about the Journal of Financial Therapy and how it fits in, you're looking for the lingo of behavioral economics, financial therapy, psychology of finance, financial life planning, personal financial planning, consumer finance. All of these can be housed under different departments in different universities, such as business, human services, or psychology. But what drew me to it the most was the blending of fields. You know, I've always liked to be eclectic and I've always liked to be integrative. When I was working with children with cancer, you just had to be out of the box thinking, you had to make it work for them. So it may be the nurse, it may be the social worker, it may be the cafeteria person who's going to make a special cake. And for me, the field of financial therapy with the planners and the counselors and the social workers really felt like a good home in the last probably 5 to 6 years for me. Next slide, please. So when we talk about prevention and intervention, the financial concerns are considered always. I appreciated this quote from Sarah Washington O'Neill Rush. Even when life is at its best, usually there are clouds or rains and something's looming. I find that it's best to prepare for the bad days during good times when I'm emotionally strong. And that's what we have to do in the field of trauma. Sarah Washington O'Neill Rush is the great-granddaughter of Booker T. Washington, and she's also a mental health clinician out in California. And so it's through that prevention that we learn when we're having good times what we do in intervention. That sailboat down below is one that I've been on. I might actually even be in that scene. I'm not quite sure. And when we talk about offshore racing, we talk about thinking about things that could go wrong. We want to prevent people from falling overboard. We don't want to have to intervene and try to get them back on board in the middle of the night in the Irish Seas. Success rate of that happening and getting somebody back on board alive is quite slim. So when we think about finances, we want to get to people as a preventative space and intervene secondarily. COVID-19 happens, we're in a unique space. Next slide, please. Because with prevention, we have this quote that was partly Ben Franklin's. He didn't plagiarize, but it came twice before him. And he talked about our new constitution is now established and as an appearance promises permanency, but in this world, nothing can be said to be certain except for death and taxes. So when we think about money and we think about things we don't like to talk about, those of us that were trauma therapists, it just made sense to add the concept of money, because money has emotions, and emotions can be highs, they can be lows, they can be things we do good things with, they can be things we do destructive things with. And I thought it was ironic that this too was a Friday the 13th, because when a lot of things shut down for COVID in America, it was a Friday the 13th in March of this year. So the book down below, I'm Dead Now What, is actually a preventative tool that I've taught people to use. There's nothing more devastating than losing a loved one and not being able to get into the passwords to figure out all the mortgage things, all the bank things, all the life insurance policies. And so, even if you don't do a will and testament, please write it down. Please keep it somewhere where somebody knows. Somebody has to be able to find these things. It shouldn't be a scavenger hunt after you're gone. Next slide, please. So a couple of things happen to us when trauma happens. Our bodies kind of have an innate ability to do one of three things, or maybe one of two things. And some of us fight it. Some of us scream and yell and put our fists up and just go for it and just rush into battle. Some of us run away from it. Oh, I want nothing to do with that. I'm going to go hide behind the tree. I don't feel very good. I don't want to be here. Some of us freeze and go inward. Okay, if I'm not in this body, it's not happening to me. I'm just going to float out and I'm not going to remember anything of what's occurring. So I can fight, I can flee, or I can freeze. And these are just innate things that each one of us has in our own body that it just does. We don't necessarily know which one is going to occur. And we can train, to do them differently in the future, but it's not given that we're going to be one or the other. When we have a traumatic experience happen, our body releases hormones and every part of us goes into that survival mode. I would honestly say that the global pandemic of COVID-19 is falling into the category of traumatic because it's affecting every single one of us in different ways. Some of us may be safe in our shelters and some of us may not. Some of us may be safe in our minds and some of us may not. Next slide, please. So we get the brain on stress, right? We've got our fight, we've got our flee, we've got our freeze. Well, where's our thinking, learning brain? It's the prefrontal cortex. that number one star. It's the green. It's where we want to be. It's the place that helps us to think and organize and, you know, plan our day and plan our future and write the bullet points down and, you know, live the best life we can, starting off fresh in the morning. Well, now we go into survival and emotion mode. Uh-oh, that's the limbic system. It can't remember where it put its keys. It can't remember where it's going. It can't think through how to spell things. And that's even if you don't have COVID. If you have COVID, there's another whole level of oofta. But when we go into that survival mode, we really, really cannot assuredly know what we're doing and where we're going with it. We are in a fight or flight state that keeps our body just surviving, not thriving. I'd say we thrive in the space where we can think and learn, but I'd say we survive in that limbic system. Next slide, please. So how do we consider this trauma with financial therapy? So there's been many theories before now that have looked at trauma, and it just really kind of overlays with the finance piece. The ACE study years ago that Kaiser did out in California looked at the investigation of childhood abuse and neglect and household challenges on later life health and well-being. Well, let's think about the household challenges people are facing right now. Are they leaving? Are they not leaving? Do they have jobs? Do they not have jobs? You know, Bessel van der Kolk is doing an outstanding job and has been in his field for many, many years, you know, reminding us that the body keeps score. Where do we keep this? Do we hold it in our heart? Do we hold it in our head? Do we hold it in our back pain? Do we hold it for 3 generations? You know, where do we lock our experiences away? I've always appreciated David Spiegel because of his work working with cancer patients and his book about living beyond limits. You know, how do we think about death while we're still living? Nobody wants to talk about death and nobody wants to talk about taxes. Though we talk about it, but we don't really want to feel anything that goes along with those 2 items. So we have to remember that as practitioners and even ourselves, that vicarious parts of the self capture the trauma and can also have that financial piece within. So if I'm told that I will get paid if I do something that I don't feel okay doing at all, now I've paired money with trauma. Next slide, please. These are just some of the topics. I'm probably sure I missed 1 or 2, but these are some of the topics that bring people into financial therapy. Now, the role of the financial therapist is not to give financial advice. We do not do that. That is not our space, but we are there to help sort through all the feelings that go through this. Mortgage, career changes, underemployment, death of a loved one, socioeconomic issues, bankruptcy, hoarding, college debt, drug and alcohol addictions and their costs. You know, was I somebody that stole from my relatives to get the money? Was I somebody that sold my body to get the money? Have I been doing things that I don't want, but that was my currency? You know, retirement bills, pet care, payday lenders. That was a new one for me in terms of, wow, the interest rate and how far down you can spiral when you have these things. So we talk about it and we think, you know, we hear words like the economy. We hear words like unemployment. All of these things have emotions tied to them. All of these things have humans and their moods tied to them. So this is very much, you know, in the realm of therapy, in the sense of how do we help turn this around? How do we get to a spot where we feel like we're at least a foot into the dirt, but we're not 20 feet down in the hole? Next slide, please. A few people have been talking about the concept of the boat, and Dr. Ted Klontz had mentioned it a couple weeks back as well. And these would be the questions I would want you to ask yourself and then ask the folks you're working with. You know, what is your individual story on your individual boat? We may all be out in this gigantic ocean, but at the end of the day, we're all on our own boat. So what is it like on your boat during the most recent storm? Is your boat floating? Does it have holes? Was it tossed and wrecked on land? Are you still underway looking for safer ports? Who is there with you? Were there others at the beginning that have passed away since? Have you tossed somebody overboard? Just couldn't be quarantined with them anymore. Do you wish you had another person that was with you? Is your boat still in the water? Ask yourself, what is the story of your personal boat? Next slide, please. So here's some situational examples of what's been occurring in some of the lives of the people that I've come across in the last couple of weeks. There's going to be 3 pages of these, and these could be in all of the time of COVID, or these can be in not the time of COVID, but I want you to think about the complexity of these being in the time of COVID. So there's a man trying to remortgage a home that never included his wife's name on the mortgage, now revisits the trust issues that his wife's past addiction and newer sobriety has. Oh, I need to trust her now in her credit score because I'm going to put her on the mortgage, huh? Okay. An individual gets his second DUI because he's trying to buy more alcohol while driving throughout the day at home. In a clearance position, he now worries about his income. A person's about to go on a trip of a lifetime that can't go even though the money was spent. Well, the way to cope with that is you start working excessively to fill the void. An adult child discovers that a parent has used their information to open up lines of credit without their consent. Okay, mom and dad are possibly stealing from you, maybe for good reasons, maybe for not good reasons, but how do you reconcile that? That's a tricky one. The loss of a dog during this time and a huge medical bill for trying to save them. So not only are you home without your companion, you've got the bills coming in that remind you that your companion's not there with you. Next slide, please. A couple debating who to leave children with via their will because of money abilities of relatives. No, they were going to think about doing a will in a few more years, but you know, just in case either or both get ill with COVID, what do we do? The concept of I have money to spend and nowhere to go. I might as well party with marijuana, alcohol, and methamphetamines. I got nothing else to do and still earning my living, and I'm just going to source my means, be home and party alone. I don't have money because I've lost my job. How will I pay my bills? Well, I had quit smoking, but now I'm stressed out, so I start smoking again. Well, there's some more money gone there too. And we're now doing a behavior and have a new habit back that we thought we kicked that affects lung capacity in the time when we have something that affects lung issues. A person fearing their gambling sobriety is going to get challenged as they want to be able to provide funds for their family quickly. They used to be the rescuer, they used to be the caretaker, and now they're scared because they can't earn more because there's no ability to. How do they not want to gamble again? A family where they've lost a young adult to an overdose at home wonders if they should sell their home now because every time they walk down the hallway, they have PTSD from what they found. Next slide, please. Online shopping and excessive spending to complete the emptiness, fear, and sadness. Stores are closing, malls are not open. Well, we have a computer, some of us, and some of us have credit cards. So there can be excessive spending going on right now. It's the gone to college or work, back again student that is now drinking from their parents' stash to deal with the confusion of not adulting anymore. Well, we always know we kind of have to sort of maybe sometimes come home for the holidays, some of us. But what about if you weren't coming home and now, college tells you to go home and now you're with the people that you didn't want to be with to begin with, and now you really can't be an adult again. It's the residential treatment facility home reentry. It's the financial cost and the safety plan that the parents and family members are trying to figure out who's been masked, who hasn't been masked, who were they around, how do I quarantine them? Can I even afford to help send them to treatment? It's the new job that the person got right before the shutdown that sends them to panic attacks and grasping for their first time pain relief medication. It's the shutdown of the courts and fees for attorneys to decide, is this a custodial snow day or a summer vacation day? Because according to divorce decrees, that was never specified as a pandemic day. Next slide, please. So these are some of the intervention resources and techniques that I've been using, and I know some of my colleagues for sure have been using during this time. Cognitive behavioral therapy, making appropriate referrals to others, working on taking each day in 4-hour chunks, talking about breath and heart rate variability, sleep, eating, hydration, and addressing isolation. Next slide, please. So when we talk about cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the things that I've always appreciated about it the most is the doing part. I guess it's probably because that's who I am. I'm a doer. I could be very much in the thinking and feeling space, but that never really helped me. I just had to go do something. So I try to meet people where they're at and see if there's anything they can do. And anything they can do might be very minimal, but it's something. Because I have found over the years that if I start with the thinking and ask them how they think more about how they feel, and they feel how they think. And doing, that one gets to be a really tough thing to do. So if we start with the behavioral part of the thinking, it sometimes shifts the thinking and feeling and gets them to even a bigger spot of doing. So 1 foot at a time is how a marathon is run. 1 inch at a time is how a sailboat race is won. You know, it doesn't have to be a whole mile at the beginning. And right now the doing is important because I think a lot of people are very thinking and feeling. So I need people to keep doing. Next slide, please. Referrals. Oh my goodness. I have talked to plenty of people in the last couple of weeks because I want to make sure that best care is getting the right resources for them. So referrals can be therapists that, especially right now because of trauma, do DBT or EMDR, EMI, physicians, attorneys, family life planners, accountants, business planners, veterinarians, residential facilities, realtors, mortgage brokers, religious support teams. That includes, many types of religions. So you can have priests and pastors and imams and rabbis, contractors, insurance agents, long-term care providers, chiropractors, massage therapists, organizers, cleaners. It's a village. Just because the village seems to all be in this little box online doesn't mean that we've all gone away. And so it's really important to expand your thinking when you work with folks to think outside of the box. It's the whole village. It's not just a physician. It's not just a coach. There's all of us. It takes many people. If I've got somebody that comes in and is stressed out because their house is flooding, because some pipe burst, I would hope they wouldn't want 7 sessions of therapy over the next 7 weeks while the pipe keeps bursting and flooding their home. I would hope that they could find a plumber. And if they didn't know one, I would hope that we would have resources to find them a plumber. Now, they don't need to take that referral. There's no money advanced back anywhere to any therapist. But if I've had a good experience with somebody, yeah, here's your plumber. Wow, 6 sessions, you don't need to talk about how your pipe is burst because you've already solved the problem. And that's how I think of as being a doer, is some of these referrals can actually be the first step that somebody might do. Making that phone call to a residential facility is the first step they might do. Next slide, please. So we always had that motto of, oh, we'll just take it one day at a time, not such big steps. And I said to a couple of people earlier on, one day? No way. One day at a time's got way too many changes in it. That is way too hard. So when I looked at the day, I kind of broke it down a little bit. I know it's got 24 hours in it, and I know it's got, 168 hours a week, but take it one bite at a time and 4-hour chunks, because your self-care and Maslow's hierarchy of needs reminds you to come back to the center. What you might be doing first thing in the morning may look very different by what you're doing late in the afternoon. One day at a time is too big. There's too much going on. There's too many decisions being made. There's too many decisions being made that are being unmade. There's too much information that's being reappropriated in a bazillion different ways. So when you're having a tough time, try to break your day down in 4-hour chunks. Okay, what am I doing this morning? What am I doing around lunch? What am I doing this afternoon? What's my plan for this evening? One day at a time is just too big right now. Next slide, please. So let's talk about breath, okay? Something we do every day, something we take for granted a lot of the time, something we don't even know we're doing, but I'm really glad we are. That is what I mean about doing. Starting with an emptiness space, which is our breath. So during the exhalation, that's when the vagus nerve secretes the acetylcholine that slows our heart down slightly via the parasympathetic nervous system. Okay? What happens when we're anxious? We inhale a lot and we don't feel good, and then our blood pressure feels lousy and our sweat starts, and if we can exhale, we can biohack our system a little bit. And no, I'm not some Zen master. There's a bazillion other people that have got a gazillion other awesome meditative ideas about this. And some of the ones I've listed here, but we want to calm it down. Now, what does this have to do with financial therapy? Again, remember our fight or flight mechanism, that beginning part where our thinking brain is not lit up because it went from green to red and it went down to that little heart at the bottom. We need to work on centering. We can't talk about finances if you're panicking. We can't talk about anything if you're not breathing properly. We can't talk about it if you're so anxious that all you can think about is your anxiety. So folks like Kabat-Zinn, you know, Doctors Bernie Segal, Andrew Weil, Ted Klontz, Herbert Benson, you know, over the years, Wim Hof, love the guy. He's just totally made himself out of the depths of trauma into somebody who understands when you've got nothing, you've got breath left. He didn't start off as a theorist. He didn't start off as a therapist. You know, he started off as a man who had 4 children and lost his wife to suicide. And he wanted to feel alive. He didn't know how to feel alive. He was now a single, you know, widowed dad. He brought it back to the breath and really mastered it. So when we focus on breathing, inhaling is great. Kind of like you're smelling some flowers or some nice scent, but really, really, really practice on that exhale. Can't hurt us right now, that's for sure. Pretend to do bubbles. I'm blowing bubbles. That one's from my good colleague, Ruth Ritchie. Or pretend like you're blowing up a balloon. You know, blow out some birthday candles. Put your tongue behind your teeth at the roof of your mouth and either inhale or exhale through your nose, or inhale and exhale through your mouth. See what it feels like to be using different parts of our airway. See what it feels like to be able to actually exhale completely. Because we don't do that enough. We do it because we're alive, but we don't do it because we're slowing down to think, ooh, is this actually going to get our system kind of back at a reset space? Because the whole world is not reset. It's nowhere near reset. The whole world is still on the fritz. But how do we get ourselves to reset? Because we don't have the past moment. We don't have the next moment. We only have the present moment. And that's through pretending to breathe into balloons or bubbles. You know, you can pretend, like I said, like you have that bubble stick, or grab a straw, blow bubbles for real in a glass, you know, have fun. Because if you don't have fun and you don't laugh occasionally at yourself, well, we're going to have even more trouble with finances. Next slide, please. Sleep. Okay, if we could figure out our breathing, let's try to figure out our sleep. If we don't have our sleep figured out, we can't, again, think anything through with finances. Sleep has been found as the one space that when a test has been given to police officers, this was actually an NPR thing that I listened to a couple days ago, and they were talking about a study, and it was, you know, in a laboratory, so to speak. And they wanted to see, you know, if folks could identify the difference between somebody with a gun or somebody with a wallet. And the general population was pretty lousy at it. And the police officers were awesome at it. Pretty darn accurate, right? I can identify the difference between what that person's carrying in a simulated video. Where it all fell to heck for the police officers is when they messed with the sleep. They found that their accuracy went down when they were sleep deprived. That's a huge thing. That's a very huge thing for every one of us to know. Our accuracy is going to go down if our sleep is not regulated and registered. So remove the appliances next to your head on the nightstand. Learn about blue blocking glasses. No more TV that you're falling asleep to. We don't need all that, because now we've got high def, we've got, you know, surround sound, we've got 4D, we've got bigger, bolder, broader, you know, lots of lighting coming at us. Try some weighted blankets, try some calming smells, try some white noise, okay? Without enough quality sleep, we're making the choices dramatically different that we would like to be making. So if you want more on sleep, that's Dr. Michael Brous. He's got the sleep doctor and he's pretty awesome at that. Next slide, please. Eating, it's one of my favorite hobbies. It's one of the things I keep doing while I'm home. But what are we fueling our systems with? Okay, are we fueling them with the melted paraffin wax, or are we filling it with the high octane stuff? You know, in the DMV area, somewhat, there are areas where we can get some vegetables that might have actually been grown within a 50-mile radius. You know, not everybody has that opportunity to get fresh vegetables, but while they're growing right now, please try your best to go get some. Now, I love my Oreos. I'm not going to say that I don't. I'm not going to say that I haven't been baking some goods that have way too much sugar in them. But on a daily basis, let's think this through. We're going through a space that's traumatic. We want our brains to work well. We want our systems to be calm. We want to be able to talk about our finances so we don't lose our housing at all. What do we need to do? We need to be able to eat. Okay, next slide, please. Dr. Terry Walls is actually the one that I would recommend for the eating. Hydrate. Which beverage are we choosing? Okay, again, no judgment space. Are we choosing the one on the left or are we choosing the one on the right? If we forget to choose the one on the right often enough, go for the Plant Nanny app. You basically water a virtual plant every time you water yourself, and nothing feels worse than when you kill your virtual plant. Next slide, please. Isolation. Boy, oh boy, that's been one that we're asking people to do, and then we're not asking people to do, but we're asking people to do it from distances that could be 3 to 6 feet. Who knows? Depends on the study. So quarantines or dolphin pods. I had suggested this early on, that you pick somebody that you would trust your life with and the lives of your children. And you try to see if you can come up with a plan where you can isolate together. My family for early on chose to isolate with 2 other families. There was no other way we were going to make this work for childcare. There was no other way we were going to make this work for our mental sanity. There was no way we were going to keep at then, 5-year-old and 6-year-old across the street from each other, not seeing each other for months on end. So the 5-year-old is now 6, the 6-year-old is going to be 7 in a week, and they were able to attend each other's isolated birthday parties because we as a family early on decided we had to do this. We just couldn't do this alone. So again, think through the strategy. You know, you don't have to be alone. You don't have to be lonely. If you don't have extended folks, reach out. Groups online, chats, phones, Gamblers Anonymous, Dedimus Anonymous, there's a whole bunch of different groups. Reach out. If you don't want to be with a group, but you still want to talk to somebody, call Crisis Link. If you don't want to talk to somebody, but you want to text somebody, I have gobloads of Old Dominion University students that are, you know, doing rotations with crisis techs, because when their full-time sites shut down at hospitals and nursing care facilities and daycare centers, they had to go somewhere. Where'd they go? They went online. So you do not have to isolate. It's not helpful. It's not the best thing for your mental health. That also means you don't have to go to a party with 1 million people, though. I'm just suggesting that you think through not being alone. Next slide, please. So here are some specific techniques that I used to use before COVID happened, and I will look forward to using more and more of these as we go along. Like I said, it's not to say that we're not using these, but if I've got somebody who can't get past the panic and can't get past the anxiety and can't get past what they're going to think of in the next hour, it's very hard to be adding teaching items to the neocortex. The brain doesn't register it. But in the field of financial therapy, these are the items that would have standardly be used in a non-global crisis time. So mental health as it applies to financial health, you know, we look at the disorders of the V codes, the significant factors that influence the present or the future care. So money scripts, you know, doctors Ted and Brad Klontz, the first thoughts lead at times into communication, learning, and attachment styles. A money script is how we think about money. Like I said, if I ask you to think about the first time you were ever given $1 or a quid or whatever country you're coming from, you're going to have a moment and you're going to have to think about it, but it might have been a family member. It might've been a teacher. It might've been, you know, a friend. You might've been buying bubble gum with it. You might've been stealing it because you wanted bubble gum. You know, what is your money script? How did it develop over time? Do I think money is a good thing? Do I think money is a scary thing? You know, we want you to talk about your money story. Budgeting. A lot of us didn't grow up in spaces where we learned how to budget. We just saw people pay bills, complain about paying bills, have enough, not enough, use money to advance themselves, use money to try to dig out of holes. You know, what do we do for earning, spending, saving, and gifting? So sometimes in financial therapy, we talk about those 4 categories. You know, do you want to save? Do you not want to save? How do you earn? How do you not earn? Are you scared? Are you okay? You know, where are you going with that? My favorite tool has been to use a genogram, you know, the family diagrams that you use, you know, throughout to try to figure out, well, who used to do this behavior and this behavior and this behavior can now be used, you know, around money behaviors. Oh, my mom saved and she used to hide things because my dad used to drink and she was afraid if she didn't hide that, we wouldn't have electricity to pay the electric bill. Well, that's going to make you choose differently as an adult. Are you going to be somebody that never spends? Are you going to marry somebody who doesn't spend? What's your story going to be? So again, family genograms around money are really key. Debt calculators. This goes a lot with the concept of interest. I see gobloads of students signing up for student loans and they have absolutely no idea what interest looks like. You know, oh, I'll just pay a little bit each month. Well, each month turns into 30 years. And while I think that there are moments where, you know, you can kind of win, there's a lot of moments where you can't with debt. Most of them, I'd say 99.9% of them, you're not going to get ahead. It's very, very slim thing. So trying to have people understand their debt ratio, their debt calculator to figure out interest on things like mortgages, student loans, even their earning capacity. You know, if you're working at a job that pays $20 an hour, but you're spending really something like you had a job that, you know, earned $50 an hour, they have to understand that. Money affirmations, again, how do we feel about money? You know, if I don't feel good about money, how am I going to spend it? How am I going to earn it? What am I going to choose to do with it? You know, if money was something that I used to buy drugs with, how am I ever going to use money again? Oh, there's a trigger spot. So it's that sticky thread that goes through all of these things in life that for so often we haven't talked about. And then also the Klontz money script inventory, again, a great assessment. It measures 4 core money beliefs. It measures money avoidance. It measures money worship, money status, and money vigilance. In the last 4 months, I haven't been able to use it though, because I haven't been able to get people past a spot where their primal brain is just constantly in flight, freeze, flee mode, scared, fight, I don't know, you know? So these are wonderful tools and I can't wait to continue to use them. But when you talk about it with folks, you really need to meet them where they're at. They might have lost their jobs. They might have had to move back home with family. They might be back into their addiction where they were doing okay. Sobriety was doing them okay. So now here we are. Next slide, please. And I also love to use financial literacy. I'm not so certain the public really thought it was cool to think about numbers. You know, people either love numbers or they don't like numbers. Oh, I was never good at math. You know, I hear that all the time. Okay. But I have to have them understand numbers. Numbers are what buy them shelter sometimes. Numbers are what provide them food sometimes. So when I even was on a podcast with you guys a couple weeks ago, I noticed that somebody had said, oh yeah, I spent all the money because I'm back in my addiction. Well, again, we need to be able to talk about money, and we need to be able to talk about what it's doing for us right now. So these are some of the many, and I don't mean to exclude any, books, podcasts, websites. So Dr. Brad and Ted Klontz have one that's called Mind Over Money. Thomas Stanley was The Millionaire Mind. Andrew Jesuit has the studentloanhero.com. That one is huge for a lot of the academics because you get to a spot where you may not know how to shovel out. And there are so many inspirational stories on there. Luis Barajas has a great one called My Street Money, because I think oftentimes when we talk about financial planners and when we talk about, earning and investments, that, we forget that not every single one of us is going to have some, $1 million, wealth fund. So My Street Money is an excellent one. Kabir Sahal did a great book on called Coins, and it really looks at currency and the history of our exchange and what that means to us as human beings. Barbara Stanley does a lot about women overcoming under earning. Anthony O'Neill, again, great guy for college guides. Dave Ramsey's done a ton for folks with the Zero Balance Budget, Total Money Makeover. He's got a great app. Barry Tesler's got The Art of Money and her workbook. Or I call The Art of Money more of a workbook because she's got so many juicy, tangible things that you can do to kind of get at your money feelings. Jean Chatsky's, who's been online for many, many years, also has Operation Money, which is a great one for family and military. Catherine Morgan is a gal over in the UK, and she's got her Financial Shoes podcast, which again looks at a different angle internationally for us. Farnoosh Tarubi has the So Money podcast, and George Kinder, who is also kind of a financial planner but spiritual guru, have the 7 stages of money maturity. He too started off years ago recognizing that money had an emotional attachment to our ever being. Next slide, please. And that's what I have today. I'm more than happy to answer any questions you guys might have, but that's how you can reach me. Before COVID and before children, those are the spaces I was.
Thank you very much, Robin. I appreciate what you said in the beginning too, that we avoid talking about money in therapy, and such a core conversation, core issue for so many of us. So thank you for the work you're doing. While we have you here, because this is a series about local practitioners and you're practicing here in the DC area, tell us a little bit about your actual practice, where you are, what you're doing, and give us a rundown on that.
Sure. So in non-COVID times, I was located in Sterling. I am fully online right now and intend to be for the unforeseen future. I'm licensed to practice in Virginia, Florida, and California. So I've been working with, every family that wants to come my way. Because again, if I'm not the right practitioner, I'm not the right resource, I will find them somebody to go talk with. I've got a passion for working with athletes. I think that comes from my having been an athlete. I've got a passion for working with business owners. So you can totally find me on, win-op.com, because that's where I'll be.
Thank you, Robin. We are, right at the end of time, and just, one more question, and I know you covered it to a degree, but what are the differences that you're seeing again during, COVID-19 versus the work, in previous times?
I'm seeing folks that would have never been shaken have anxiety and depression that I would have never predicted. These are folks that have had jobs where they've signed up knowing that it was going to be high stakes kind of jobs, and the unknown factor of how many things keep changing has definitely increased it. The kids being sent home and the work from home concept, and the work from home concept where I don't know if it's safe or not to get a nanny because of COVID. Does the nanny wear a mask the whole time? Does the nanny just keep everybody out in the heat? I think that that's been very joggling for a lot of people, because a lot of people were really feeling hunkered down, trying to work at home and stay at home with the kids. But then there's also the flip side of there's folks that want to go out desperately, and how did they go out and how do they do it safely? And so it's just, it's been different. And that's why I think for me, it's been global. It's not just one region. It's not just one person. It's been everybody.
Thank you for that. We seem very similar, so I appreciate your insight and perspective.
Sure.
Thanks, so much for joining us and taking the time out of your day and preparing for this and doing this presentation. For everyone that attended, thank you very much for joining us, for being here. Please join us next week, same day, same time, as we welcome Erica Cass, who will discuss the topic Trauma Informing the 12 Steps. After that, the following week, Alex Ribbentrop will join us to discuss intergenerational trauma, personality disorders, and addiction. Registration is open for those webinars in advance, and all additional webinars through the end of July are available for registration. If you have any questions, if there's anything that you might need, please feel free to reach out to myself here at Encore Outpatient Services, to Mallory Schwartzman at Maryland Addiction Recovery Center, Jess Ayer for Caron Treatment Centers in Maryland, as well as James Flint J., who represents Caron Treatment Centers in Washington, D.C. and the state of Virginia. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us. Robin, thanks again so much. Have a wonderful afternoon and the rest of your week.